Listen carefully. Your emotions are either your greatest asset or your most expensive weakness. Every stalled goal, every ruined relationship, every wasted day can be traced back to one truth: you reacted when you should have led. This audiobook is about taking command, not suppressing emotion, not pretending you feel nothing, commanding it. Because the moment you control your emotions, you control your focus. You control your decisions. You control your future. And when that happens, your life stops drifting and starts moving with force, direction, and discipline. Chapter 1. Stop letting feelings run the day. Most people think they have a time problem. They say they need a better schedule, better tools, better opportunities, better luck. No, that is not the real problem. Most people do not have a time problem. They do not have a talent problem. They do not even have a resource problem. They have an emotional management problem. That is the truth. They wake up and ask one dangerous question: how do I feel today? And then they build the day around the answer. That is where they lose. Because if you let your feelings decide your actions, your feelings will destroy your consistency. And once consistency is gone, confidence disappears right behind it. Then discipline weakens. Then identity breaks. That is how a bad hour becomes a bad day. That is how a bad day becomes a bad week. That is how a bad week becomes a life you no longer recognize. You have a choice. You can either lead your emotions or be led by them. And if you are serious about changing your life, there is one sentence you must burn into your mind. A feeling is not a command. Say it again. A feeling is not a command. You feel tired. Fine. You feel discouraged. Fine. You feel angry. Fine. You feel unmotivated. Fine. But none of that is an order. None of that is authority. None of that gets to decide what you do next. That's the key. A feeling is data, not destiny. A feeling is weather, not direction. A feeling passes, but the consequences of obeying it can stay with you for years. Look at how most people lose control of a day. It is rarely dramatic. It is subtle. It starts in the morning. The alarm goes off. They feel heavy. They feel uninspired. They do not feel like training, so they skip the workout. They tell themselves it is just one day. Then they feel slightly guilty. That guilt makes them avoid the cold shower, the morning walk, the journaling, the quiet start they know they need. Now they feel behind. Then the email comes in. An important one. A difficult one. One they need to answer. But they do not feel ready. So they delay it. Then they delay the follow-up call. Then they avoid the hard conversation. Then they scroll. Then they snack. Then they distract. Then they say, "I'll get serious later." Later never comes. And by the end of the day, they are sitting in the wreckage of their own emotional obedience, calling themselves lazy, broken, unlucky, inconsistent. But the truth is simpler. They did not lose the day because they lacked ability. They lost the day because they kept bowing to every passing feeling. Small reactions create large consequences. That one sentence explains more failure than most people are willing to admit. Skipping the workout looks small. Avoiding the email looks small. Postponing the conversation looks small. Sleeping in looks small. Complaining looks small. But small reactions create large consequences. The workout you skipped was not just a workout. It was a vote for who you are. The email you avoided was not just an email. It was a signal to your mind that discomfort controls you. The conversation you postponed was not just a conversation. It was practice in hesitation. And practice matters. Because whatever you repeat, you become. You have a choice. Every day, every hour, in every moment of emotional pressure, you have a choice. You can say, "This is how I feel, so this is what I'll do." Or you can say, "This is how I feel, but I still decide." That is power. That is self-respect. That is emotional discipline. Understand this clearly. Being emotional is not the problem. Being human is not the problem. Feeling frustration, sadness, fear, doubt, resistance, insecurity, none of that makes you weak. What makes you weak is treating those feelings like a king. What makes you weak is kneeling to them. You can feel deeply and still act strongly. You can feel doubt and still move. You can feel fear and still speak. You can feel resistance and still work. You can feel pain and still lead yourself. That is one of the most important truths in this entire audiobook. You can feel it and still lead yourself. Again, you can feel it and still lead yourself. This is where people get confused. They think emotional control means becoming cold, robotic, numb. Wrong. Emotional control is not suppression. It is leadership. It is not pretending you feel nothing. It is refusing to let feelings drive the vehicle. You do not need to deny the emotion. You need to stop obeying it blindly. That's the key. A disciplined person does not wake up every day feeling perfect. A disciplined person wakes up and honors the standard anyway. That is the difference. The average person asks, "What do I feel like doing?" The disciplined person asks, "What must be done?" One question creates drift. The other creates direction. And direction is everything. If you want to take your day back, stop making decisions at the level of mood. Make them at the level of mission. Do not ask whether you feel like training. Ask whether training is part of the standard. Do not ask whether you feel like making the call. Ask whether the call matters. Do not ask whether you feel like being patient, focused, and calm. Ask whether the person you are trying to become behaves that way. It's not about mood. It's about discipline. It's not about motivation. It's about standards. It's not about comfort. It's about command. You don't need their permission. And you do not need permission from your feelings either. You do not need your emotions to agree with your goals before you act. That is one of the biggest lies people believe. They think action should wait for emotional alignment. No. Action creates alignment. Movement changes mood. Execution restores clarity. Doing the thing often creates the feeling you were waiting for. But if you keep waiting to feel ready, you will stay stuck. So what do you do in real life? Simple. You interrupt the pattern. The moment you catch yourself saying, "I don't feel like it," you answer with, "A feeling is not a command." When you want to delay, move immediately. When you want to hide, engage directly. When you want to drift, return to the next concrete task. Shrink the battle. Do not think about the whole week. Win the next 10 minutes. Send the email. Put on the shoes. Drink the water. Take the walk. Open the document. Start messy. Start tired. Start annoyed. Start anyway. You have a choice. And here is another truth you need to hear. Every time you override emotional laziness, you build trust with yourself. That trust matters. Because your future strength is built on evidence. Evidence that you can act when it is hard. Evidence that you do not fold under discomfort. Evidence that you keep your word even when your mood changes. That is how identity changes. Not through speeches. Not through wishful thinking. Through repeated proof. Small proof. Daily proof. Boring proof. And yes, emotional drift is subtle. But so is emotional strength. It is built in quiet moments. When nobody claps. When nobody sees. When there is no dramatic soundtrack. Just you, your mind, your excuses, and your decision. That is where the real battle is. And that is why this matters so much. If you cannot control the emotional pattern of a morning, you will struggle to control the direction of a life. Because days become weeks. Weeks become years. Years become identity. So stop handing your future over to temporary feelings. Feel what you feel, but do not kneel to it. Let that sit in your mind. Feel it, but do not kneel to it. You are not here to be ruled by moods. You are here to build command. You are here to become stable. You are here to become dangerous to distraction, dangerous to delay, dangerous to every emotion that tries to pull you off course. A feeling is not a command. Small reactions create large consequences. You can feel it and still lead yourself. That is the foundation. That is where control begins. Master this, and your days stop being emotional accidents. They start becoming deliberate victories. You stopped letting feelings run the day. Good. Now you must go deeper. Because the next battle is even more important. It is not just about what you feel. It is about how you speak to yourself when pressure rises. Chapter 2. Your mind needs a leader, not a victim. Your life follows the voice in your head. Not sometimes. Not a little. Consistently. The way you speak to yourself shapes the way you move through pressure, setbacks, conflict, fatigue, uncertainty, and fear. That voice is not background noise. That voice is instruction. That voice is direction. That voice is training. And if that voice is weak, your actions will eventually become weak. If that voice is helpless, your behavior will eventually become helpless. If that voice is chaotic, your days will become chaotic. That's the key. Your words train your mind. Say it again. Your words train your mind. Most people never realize how much damage they do with the language they repeat every day. They say, "I can't focus." They say, "I'm overwhelmed." They say, "I'm just stressed." They say, "I don't know what to do." They say, "Nothing is working." They say, "I'm not built for this." They say it casually. They say it emotionally. They say it so often that it starts to feel true. But here is the problem. The mind listens. The mind believes repetition. The mind accepts instruction, especially when it comes wrapped in emotion. So when you keep saying, "I can't handle this," your mind begins preparing for collapse. When you keep saying, "I'm overwhelmed," your mind stops searching for order. When you keep saying, "I don't know what to do," your mind learns passivity instead of problem-solving. That is how inner chaos expands. Not just through hard circumstances. Through undisciplined language. You have a choice. You can keep using words that weaken your posture. Or you can start using words that build command. Because the truth is simple. A victim speaks in surrender. A leader speaks in direction. A victim says, "I can't focus." A leader says, "I will focus on one thing." A victim says, "Everything is too much." A leader says, "I will simplify." A victim says, "I'm stuck." A leader says, "I will move." That is not fake positivity. That is self-leadership. That is emotional control in verbal form. That is how order begins. Understand this clearly. Leadership does not begin when other people trust you. Leadership begins when your own mind trusts your voice. And your mind will never trust your voice if your voice keeps panicking, complaining, dramatizing, and surrendering. That's the key. Lead your mind before you lead your life. Again. Lead your mind before you lead your life. Before you become more productive, you need to become more directive. Before you become more successful, you need to become more responsible with your internal language. Before you become more confident, you need to stop speaking like defeat is your identity. This is where transformation actually starts. Not in the bank account first. Not in the relationship first. Not in the reputation first. Inside. In the next sentence you allow yourself to say. In the next thought you choose to repeat. In the next moment of pressure, when the old script tries to return. Let's make it practical. Imagine someone under real pressure. Bills are stacking up. Their income is unstable. Someone close to them criticized them yesterday. They slept badly. They are tired. They are embarrassed. They feel behind in life. Now most people in that state begin feeding themselves poison. I'm failing. I always mess things up. I can't do this. I'm too far gone. And then they wonder why they stay frozen. Because those words are not harmless. Those words are programming. Those words are emotional instructions. Those words train the nervous system to shrink instead of respond. But the person who regains control does something different. Not magical. Not dramatic. Different. They do not solve the entire financial problem in one morning. They do not erase the criticism instantly. They do not suddenly feel strong. They simply refuse to speak to themselves like a victim. They say, I am under pressure, but I can still think. They say, I do not need to solve everything right now. I need to solve the next thing. They say, I will make the call. They say, I will review the numbers. They say, I will stop hiding. They say, I will move. That shift matters. Because self-leadership begins long before visible success appears. Long before the results show up. Long before anybody else notices. It starts in private. It starts when there is no applause. It starts when you are tired and still choose clean language. It starts when you are scared and still refuse to narrate weakness. That is power. That is the kind of power most people never build. Because they think confidence is something that arrives after circumstances improve. Wrong. Confidence is not an emotion you wait for. Confidence is a posture you practice. You practice it in your words. You practice it in your breathing. You practice it in the way you stand, decide, respond, and recover. You practice it when you do not feel ready. That's the key. Confidence is built by command, not by waiting. So stop waiting to feel confident before you act. You will wait forever. Instead, speak like someone who is responsible for what happens next. Not arrogant. Not unrealistic. Responsible. There is a difference. Responsible language sounds like this. I am frustrated, but I am still capable. I am tired, but I can still complete one task. I am uncertain, but I can still choose the next step. I got hit, but I am not finished. That is how you build self-command. Sentence by sentence. Thought by thought. Decision by decision. And that means you must get ruthless about what comes out of your mouth. Stop saying things that make you smaller. Stop exaggerating every inconvenience. Stop turning temporary emotions into permanent identities. Stop saying, I'm just bad at this. Stop saying, this is how I am. Stop saying, I've always been like this. No. That language locks the door. You have a choice. You can describe your current state, or you can define your future standard. One keeps you trapped. The other moves you forward. That's why this next phrase matters so much. Stop narrating weakness. Again. Stop narrating weakness. You do not need to announce your fear every 5 minutes. You do not need to rehearse your limitations. You do not need to keep introducing yourself to yourself as fragile, scattered, confused, or broken. You don't need their permission. And you do not need permission from your past either. Your past patterns do not get to write your next sentence unless you let them. This is not about pretending problems do not exist. It is about refusing to speak in a way that hands those problems more power. It's not about denial, it's about discipline. It's not about hype, It's about leadership. It's not about sounding strong, it's about becoming stable. There is a difference. So what should the listener do, practically? Start with awareness. Catch the weak sentence. Catch it fast. The moment you hear yourself say, "I can't," pause. Replace it. "I can do the next part." When you hear, "This is too much," replace it. "I will break it down." When you hear, "I'm overwhelmed," replace it. "I need order, not panic." When you hear, "I'm failing," replace it. "I am learning under pressure." Simple, direct, repeatable. Do not make this complicated. This is daily training. And the more often you do it, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, your first response changes. You stop collapsing in language. You stop dramatizing every problem. You stop teaching your mind to expect defeat. And once that happens, your behavior changes too. Because your mind finally has a leader. Not a winner. Not a victim. Not a helpless narrator. A leader. Someone who can look at pressure and still speak with direction. Someone who can feel stress and still choose structure. Someone who can hear criticism and still stay anchored. Someone who can be tired and still move. That person becomes hard to break. Not because life gets easier. Because their inner language gets stronger. And when your inner language gets stronger, your emotions lose some of their chaos. Your focus improves. Your posture improves. Your recovery improves. Your standards improve. Everything starts there. With the voice. With the script. With the sentences you repeat when life gets hard. So remember this. Your words train your mind. Lead your mind before you lead your life. Stop narrating weakness. Those are not slogans. Those are operating principles. Master them, and you stop becoming a hostage to internal chaos. You start becoming someone who can create order under pressure. And that is what this entire book is about: emotional control, self-command, and disciplined forward motion. You changed the way you speak. Good. Now you need to change the way you respond in the moments that cost people the most. Because one uncontrolled reaction can undo weeks of progress. Chapter 3. Pause before you pay the price. Most damage is not done by evil. It is done by impulse. Fast words. Fast decisions. Fast reactions. That is how people destroy trust, burn money, ruin opportunities, and damage their own name. Not always because they are weak. Often because they are unpaused. That's the key. You do not lose everything in one dramatic collapse. You lose it in small moments when emotion moves faster than wisdom. An angry text. A defensive reply. A panic decision. A revenge purchase. An emotional resignation. A careless sentence spoken with heat and remembered with regret. This is where emotional control becomes real. Not in theory. Not in a journal entry. In the 5 seconds after you get triggered. In the 10 seconds after your ego gets hit. In the moment when your body says, "React now," and your future quietly begs, "Wait." Because here is the truth. Reaction is expensive. Say it again. Reaction is expensive. Every impulsive reaction carries a bill. Sometimes the bill is financial. Sometimes it is relational. Sometimes it is professional. Sometimes it is reputational. Sometimes it is internal. You lose peace. You lose credibility. You lose momentum. You lose trust in yourself. And the worst part is this: most people do not notice the cost until the damage is already done. That is why this chapter matters. Because if you want to control your emotions before they control you, you must stop worshiping urgency. You must stop assuming that because you feel something strongly, you need to express it immediately. You do not. You have a choice. You can react in the moment and pay later. or you can pause in the moment and protect what matters. That is maturity. That is discipline. That is power. Let's make it plain. A manager gets criticized in a meeting. Their ego flares. They feel exposed. They feel challenged in front of the team. So they react. Their voice sharpens. Their face tightens. They cut someone off. They make the room tense. They try to win the moment. And maybe they do. Maybe the room goes silent. Maybe nobody pushes back. Maybe they feel powerful for 30 seconds. But what did they really win? Nothing. Because trust just dropped. Respect just cracked. Psychological safety just disappeared. Now the team speaks less honestly. Now creativity shrinks. Now people become cautious instead of committed. Now one emotional outburst has weakened an entire environment. That is the price. One moment can cost 1 year. One meeting. One sentence. One reaction. 1 year of damage control. That is not dramatic. That is common. Look at a relationship. 2 people are already tense. They are tired. Misunderstanding builds. One person feels hurt. Instead of pausing, they attack. They say the one sentence designed to wound. Not to solve. Not to clarify. To wound. And once it lands, it cannot be pulled back. You can apologize later. You can explain later. You can cry later. But the sentence is still in the room. Now trust is injured. Now safety is broken. Now intimacy has to rebuild through pain. All because of one unmanaged moment. Again, one moment can cost 1 year. Now look at the professional who is building something long-term. A business. A body of work. A skill. A savings plan. A reputation. They hit a rough week. Maybe 2. They feel discouraged. They feel tired. They feel unseen. So they make a decision in a valley that should never be made in a valley. They quit. They abandon the plan. They sabotage consistency because emotion told them the whole path was wrong. But it was not the path that failed. It was patience. It was perspective. It was pause. That's the key. Temporary emotion should never make permanent decisions. Read that again in your mind. Temporary emotion should never make permanent decisions. You do not need their permission. And you do not need permission from your anger, fear, embarrassment, or frustration to slow down before you act. Slowing down is not weakness. Slowing down is strategy. Most people confuse speed with strength. Wrong. Speed under emotion is often self-destruction with momentum. The strongest person in the room is often the quietest one for a few seconds longer. The one who breathes. The one who waits. The one who lets reason catch up. The one who refuses to make a permanent mess just to satisfy a temporary feeling. That person is dangerous in the best way, because they cannot be easily manipulated by the moment. That is what the pause gives you. Space. And space changes everything. A pause creates room between feeling and action. A pause interrupts the chain. Trigger. Reaction. Regret. Trigger. Reaction. Regret. That cycle ruins lives. The pause breaks it. And once it breaks, you can choose differently. This is the practical method. Simple. Not easy. Simple. First, breathe. Not because breathing is magical. Because breathing slows the body, and a slower body gives the mind a fighting chance. When the heart is racing, the jaw is tight, and the chest is hot, you are not in your best decision-making state. So breathe. Deep. Slow. Controlled. You are telling your system, do not fire yet. Second, use silence. Silence is uncomfortable for reactive people because they are addicted to immediate discharge. They need to say something. They need to send something. They need to prove something. But silence is often the difference between damage and discipline. Not every thought deserves expression. Not every emotion deserves a microphone. Not every wound deserves a response in real time. You have a choice. Third, create distance. If the conversation is hot, step away. If the message angers you, do not answer yet. If the purchase is emotional, leave the cart. If the urge is impulsive, physically move your body out of the environment. Distance weakens intensity. That's the key. You do not need to trust your first emotion. Fourth, delay the decision. This is critical. Never resign in rage. Never text in fury. Never buy in revenge. Never promise in panic. Never end something important during a temporary emotional storm. Delay is not avoidance when it protects clarity. Delay is wisdom when the alternative is damage. That is why the phrase matters. Pause, then power. Again. Pause, then power. Not pause, then weakness. Not pause, then fear. Pause, then power. Because power is not emotional discharge. Power is controlled response. Power is measured action. Power is refusing to let the moment use your hands, your mouth, your money, or your future against you. It's not about emotion, it's about timing. It's not about silence, it's about discipline. It's not about being passive, it's about being precise. That is what strong people understand. They do not suppress everything. They do not become robots. They simply stop acting like every feeling deserves immediate expression. Now let's get even more practical. What should the listener do the next time emotion spikes? Use a simple sequence. Name it. I am angry. I am embarrassed. I am triggered. Good. Naming reduces chaos. Then breathe. Then ask one brutal question. What will this cost me if I act right now? That question changes everything. Because reaction is expensive. If you send the text now, what might it cost? If you say the sentence now, what might it cost? If you quit now, what might it cost? If you buy this now, what might it cost? If you defend yourself right now just to protect your ego, what might it cost? That question drags your future into the present. And your future needs a voice. Then ask the next question. What would the disciplined version of me do next? Not the hurt version. Not the offended version. Not the exhausted version. The disciplined version. That is the identity you are building in this book. Someone who can feel deeply without reacting stupidly. Someone who can get hit without becoming reckless. Someone who understands that not every battle needs to be fought immediately. Sometimes the win is not what you say. Sometimes the win is what you refuse to say. Sometimes the win is not the purchase you make. It is the purchase you do not make. Sometimes the win is not proving your point. It is protecting your peace. That is emotional control. That is self-command. That is adulthood at a high level. So remember, reaction is expensive. One moment can cost 1 year. Pause, then power. These are not soft ideas. These are survival principles. Financial principles. Relational principles. Leadership principles. Reputational principles. If you master the pause, you stop donating your future to your worst moments. You stop letting temporary emotion write permanent consequences. And that is how real control is built, between trigger and action, between pressure and response, between feeling and choice. You learned how not to react. Good. But restraint alone is not enough. Now you need to understand one of the biggest emotional traps in human growth: mistaking discomfort for danger. Chapter 4: Discomfort is not danger. Most people are not stopped by failure. They are stopped by discomfort. That is the truth. They do not quit because the goal is impossible. They quit because the process feels awkward, uncertain, tiring, exposing, or inconvenient. And because it feels bad, they assume it is bad. That is one of the biggest emotional mistakes a person can make. They treat discomfort like a stop sign. They feel resistance and call it a warning. They feel embarrassment and call it proof. They feel uncertainty and call it failure. No. That's the key. Not everything that feels difficult is dangerous. Not everything that stretches you is hurting you. Not everything that makes you uncomfortable is a threat. Many times, it is the exact opposite. Many times, the discomfort is evidence that something in you is being expanded. That a weaker pattern is being challenged. That a stronger identity is trying to emerge. So burn this into your mind. Discomfort is the price of expansion. Say it again. Discomfort is the price of expansion. Growth rarely feels graceful in the beginning. It feels clumsy. It feels exposing. It feels frustrating. It feels unnatural. And that is exactly why so many people stay stuck. They are not addicted to comfort because comfort is good. They are addicted to comfort because comfort is familiar. Familiar feels safe. Even when familiar is keeping them small. Even when familiar is draining their confidence. Even when familiar is silently ruining their potential. You have a choice. You can keep protecting your comfort. Or you can start protecting your future. Those are not the same thing. If you choose comfort every time, you will stay exactly where you are. If you choose growth, discomfort will come with it. Every time. No exceptions. Look at public speaking. A person has something valuable to say. They know they need to speak up. At work. In a room. On a stage. In a meeting. On camera. But the body reacts. Hands shake. Voice tightens. Heart races. Thoughts scatter. And because the experience feels intense, they assume they should stop. They think, this must mean I'm not built for this. Wrong. It means you are doing something that stretches your current capacity. That is all. The shaking voice is not always a sign to retreat. Sometimes it is a sign that you are standing at the edge of growth. Uncomfortable does not mean unsafe. Again, uncomfortable does not mean unsafe. The gym is another example. A person walks in and feels out of place. They think everyone is watching. They compare themselves to people who look stronger, leaner, more confident. They feel awkward touching the equipment. They feel weak using light weight. They feel embarrassed not knowing what they are doing. And instead of treating that as a normal phase of growth, they treat it like a reason to disappear. But that discomfort is not a threat. It is initiation. It is the price of becoming someone new. No one is born feeling at home in a room they have never mastered. You earn that confidence by staying, by returning, by being willing to look inexperienced long enough to become capable. That's the key. Confidence is not what you need before you begin. Confidence is what you build after you survive enough discomfort without running. Now think about business. Someone wants to start. They have an idea. They have a skill. They have a vision. But they do not feel ready. They want certainty first. They want perfect timing first. They want full confidence first. They want no fear, no doubt, no resistance. That day never comes. Because launching something meaningful before you feel ready is often exactly how growth works. Read that carefully. You do not become ready and then act. Often, you act and then become ready. You don't need their permission. And you do not need permission from your fear either. Fear is loud when you are leaving the known. That does not make fear wise. It just makes fear predictable. The same thing happens with boundaries. A person has been overgiving for years. Over-explaining. Over-accommodating. saying yes when they mean no, staying available when they are exhausted, letting people cross lines because they are afraid of being seen as rude, selfish, cold, or difficult. Then one day they try to change. They say no. They speak clearly. They stop rescuing everyone. And what do they feel? Discomfort, guilt, tension, maybe even shame. Why? Because the nervous system is used to pleasing, not protecting. So when healthier behavior appears, the body reads it as wrong simply because it is unfamiliar. But again, uncomfortable does not mean unsafe. It might mean overdue. It might mean necessary. It might mean your life is finally starting to align with your values instead of your fears. This is where emotional maturity becomes real. A weak emotional identity asks, how do I avoid this feeling? A stronger emotional identity asks, can I carry this feeling while I act? That question changes everything. Because the goal is not to build a life with no discomfort. That is fantasy. The goal is to become the kind of person who can hold discomfort without surrendering direction. That is strength. That is self-command. That is why this phrase matters. Carry it, don't collapse under it. Again. Carry it, don't collapse under it. Carry the awkwardness of being new. Carry the uncertainty of not knowing everything yet. Carry the fatigue of building. Carry the rejection of being misunderstood. Carry the temporary loneliness of outgrowing old patterns. Carry it. Do not collapse under it. It's not about comfort, it's about capacity. It's not about ease, it's about endurance. It's not about avoiding pressure, it's about building discipline under pressure. That is the deeper lesson. You do not need to make discomfort disappear in order to move. You need to stop treating discomfort like an authority figure. It is not your boss. It is not your map. It is not your identity. It is a sensation. A temporary one. And if you keep obeying it, it will keep shrinking your world. So what should the listener do in real life? First, expect discomfort. Do not act surprised by it. Expect it. When you try something new, expect awkwardness. When you set a boundary, expect tension. When you level up, expect resistance. When you stop people-pleasing, expect guilt. When you go after something meaningful, expect uncertainty. Expectation changes the emotional experience. Because what you expect, you are less likely to fear. Second, rename the feeling. This matters. Stop saying, something is wrong. Instead say, something is changing. Stop saying, this means I shouldn't. Instead say, this means I'm stretching. Stop saying, I'm not ready. Instead say, I'm in training. Your interpretation matters. Because your emotions often follow the meaning you assign. That's the key. Third, shrink the action. If public speaking terrifies you, do not start with a stage of 1,000 people. Speak up once in the meeting. If the gym feels overwhelming, do not commit to 2 hours. Walk in. Do 20 minutes. Return tomorrow. If launching the business feels huge, do not obsess over the empire. Serve the first client. Publish the first offer. Learn from real movement. If setting boundaries feels brutal, start with one clean sentence. No, I can't do that. Simple. Direct. Honest. Growth is not always a giant leap. Often it is repeated contact with manageable discomfort. Fourth, stop negotiating with feelings that always disappear after action. This is important. How often have you dreaded something, done it anyway, and felt better afterward? That pattern is not random. Action often resolves what avoidance intensifies. Avoidance makes discomfort grow in the imagination. Action makes discomfort become measurable. And what is measurable becomes manageable. You have a choice. You can keep asking, how do I stay comfortable? Or you can start asking, what kind of person am I becoming by choosing this discomfort? That question pulls you into identity. And identity is where lasting change happens. Because the goal is not just to survive a hard moment. The goal is to become someone who is no longer shocked by the cost of growth. Someone who knows that expansion has a feeling. And that feeling is rarely comfort. It is stretch. It is heat. It is uncertainty. It is friction. And none of that means stop. Sometimes it means continue. Sometimes it means you are finally doing the work that matters. So remember, discomfort is the price of expansion. Uncomfortable does not mean unsafe. Carry it, don't collapse under it. These are not motivational slogans. They are standards for emotional strength. If you internalize them, you stop mislabeling growth as danger. You stop retreating from the exact experiences that could build your next level. And that is how emotional control deepens, by teaching yourself that the feeling of stretch is not the enemy. It is often the doorway. You learn to move through discomfort. Good. But discomfort gets stronger when your mind feeds it with stories. So the next step is critical. You must stop giving your emotions extra fuel. Chapter 5. Starve the story, strengthen the standard. Most people are not destroyed by the event. They are destroyed by the story they attach to the event. That is where the spiral begins. Not in what happened, in what they decided it meant. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A correction becomes humiliation. A mistake becomes proof of worthlessness. A quiet room becomes disrespect. And before long, the emotion is no longer reacting to reality. It is reacting to the story. That's the key. The story fuels the feeling. Say it again. The story fuels the feeling. An event by itself has weight. But the meaning you assign to it can multiply that weight. That is how a small moment becomes a major emotional collapse. Not because the event was massive. Because the interpretation was dramatic. This is one of the most important emotional skills you can build. Separating facts from fiction. Because most people do not do that. They feel something strongly, so they assume their interpretation must be true. Wrong. A strong feeling does not prove a strong fact. Emotion is not evidence. Emotion is information. And if you do not examine it, it will start writing stories that poison your behavior. You have a choice. You can believe every story your mind creates under pressure. Or you can challenge the story before it becomes your identity. That is discipline. That is maturity. That is self-command. Look at how this happens in real life. You are in a meeting. You share an idea. Nobody responds. The room moves on. Immediately, the mind starts. They don't respect me. They think I'm stupid. I should stop speaking. Now pause. What are the facts? You spoke. There was no response. That is the fact. Everything after that is interpretation. Maybe the room was distracted. Maybe they did not hear the value yet. Maybe the timing was bad. Maybe they are disorganized. Maybe your delivery needs work. Maybe none of it was personal. But once the story takes over, the feeling grows. The hurt grows. The resentment grows. The withdrawal grows. And now your future behavior is shaped by fiction. That is dangerous. Because the false story becomes a self-fulfilling pattern. You stop contributing. You become quieter. You show less confidence. And then the very outcome you feared starts to appear. Not because the original story was true. Because you obeyed it. Again. The story fuels the feeling. Take another example. You send a message to someone important to you. They reply with one short sentence. Cold. Brief. Unimpressive. The mind jumps. They're upset. They're pulling away. I did something wrong. Now your chest tightens. Your mood drops. Your behavior changes. But what are the facts? They sent a short message. That is all. You do not know their tone. You do not know their mental state. You do not know what is happening around them. You only know the length of the reply. Everything else is a story. And stories told in emotional darkness usually get ugly fast. That's why this phrase matters. Facts first. Drama last. Again. Facts first. Drama last. When your boss corrects your work, what are the facts? There was an error. A correction was made. That is the fact. But many people do something destructive. They turn correction into identity. I'm terrible at this. I always fail. I'm not respected. No matter what I do, it's never enough. Now the event is no longer a correction. It has become a wound to the ego. And ego wounds are costly because they make people defensive instead of teachable. They stop improving because they are too busy protecting a dramatic self-story. You do not need their permission. And you do not need permission from your ego to stay grounded in reality. A mistake does not mean you are a mistake. A correction does not mean rejection. A bad moment does not mean a bad identity. That is what undisciplined people forget. They build entire emotional storms out of incomplete evidence. Then they wonder why they feel constantly exhausted. Because they are not just carrying life. They are carrying fiction. It's not about sensitivity, it's about discipline. It's not about what happened, it's about what you added to it. It's not about the event, it's about the interpretation. That is where control begins. Now let's take the most dangerous story of all. This always happens to me. That sentence has ruined more progress than many people realize. Because once you start saying that, you stop dealing with a moment and start building an identity around struggle. Now every setback feels personal. Every inconvenience feels targeted. Every disappointment feels like destiny. And that is how people become emotionally addicted to their own patterns. They stop solving the issue and start rehearsing the narrative. That is weakness. Not because pain is weak. Because repetition without examination is weak. You have a choice. You can keep feeding the story. Or you can interrupt it. So how do you interrupt it? First, identify the raw fact. Strip it down. Stop living inside it blindly. Third, return to the standard. This is the turning point of the chapter. Because emotional control is not just about reducing drama. It is about replacing drama with discipline. It is about asking, regardless of how I feel, what is the standard here? If the meeting felt awkward, the standard is still preparation. If the text reply felt cold, the standard is still composure. If you made a mistake, the standard is still accountability. If you feel discouraged, the standard is still action. Show up on time. Do the work. Keep your word. Follow through. Speak clearly. Correct the mistake. Maintain your posture. That's the key. Standards protect you when feelings betray you. Again. Standards protect you when feelings betray you. When feelings are unstable, standards keep you moving. When emotions get dramatic, standards keep you grounded. When the story tries to pull you into self-pity, standards pull you back into responsibility. That is why standards matter so much. They do not depend on mood. They do not change because you feel insecure. They do not disappear because someone disappointed you. The standard remains. That is power. A powerful person does not ask every day, "What do I feel like doing?" They ask, "What is required of me?" That question cuts through emotional fog. It cuts through self-made drama. It cuts through excuse-making. Because standards do not care about the story. The standard says do the work. The standard says tell the truth. The standard says keep going. The standard says be on time. The standard says control yourself. Now, this does not mean you ignore emotion. It means you stop building a theater around it. Feel it. Notice it. But do not feed it with language that makes it larger than it is. Starve the story. Strengthen the standard. That is the practice. When the mind says, they don't respect me, ask, what are the facts? When the mind says, I always fail, ask, what is the actual pattern? When the mind says, this always happens to me, ask, what is the next responsible action? That is how adults regulate themselves. Not by pretending emotions do not exist. By refusing to let fantasy lead behavior. That is emotional mastery. That is self-respect. That is how you stop a moment from becoming a spiral. So remember, the story fuels the feeling. Facts first. Drama last. Standards protect you when feelings betray you. These are not just phrases. They are tools. Use them, and you stop turning ordinary friction into identity-level suffering. You stop feeding emotional chaos with mental exaggeration. And once the story loses fuel, the standard gets stronger. That is how control is built, through clarity, responsibility, and repeated return to what must be done. You stopped feeding the story. Good. Now it is time to build something even stronger. The ability to stay calm on purpose, under pressure, again and again. Chapter 6. Train calm like a skill. Most people treat calm like a gift. Something you either have or you do not. Something you were born with. Something lucky people carry naturally. That is a lie. Calm is not a personality trait reserved for a chosen few. Calm is a trained response. Calm is repetition. Calm is structure. Calm is self-regulation practiced so often that pressure stops feeling like permission to panic. That's the key. Calm is built, not born. Say it again. Calm is built, not born. The person who stays composed in a hard conversation did not magically wake up that way. The leader who remains steady when a plan falls apart did not inherit some rare emotional blessing. The athlete who performs under pressure did not wait for peace to descend from the sky. They trained. They repeated. They built systems. They practiced staying clear while stress tried to pull them into chaos. And that matters, because pressure exposes the truth. Not the truth you talk about. The truth you have practiced. Under pressure, people reveal their preparation. Not their intentions. Not their wishes. Not their inspirational quotes. Their preparation. That is why this next phrase matters so much. You do not perform at your hopes. You perform at your habits. Again. You do not perform at your hopes. You perform at your habits. You hope to stay calm in the argument. But if your habit is to react, you will react. You hope to stay focused in the crisis. But if your habit is scattered thinking, you will scatter. You hope to stay measured when criticized. But if your habit is defensiveness, you will defend. Pressure does not create character. Pressure reveals training. You have a choice. You can keep hoping you will magically become calm when life gets hard. Or you can start training calm before life tests you again. That is how adults build emotional control. Not by wishing for a different nervous system. By disciplining the one they have. Look at athletes. Before the shot, before the serve, before the sprint, before the free throw, what do? They breathe. They slow the body. They reduce noise. They go back to the routine. Why? Because routines interrupt panic. A trained breath tells the body, we have been here before. A repeated sequence tells the mind, stay with what you know. That is not random. That is conditioning. Now look at surgeons. They do not have the luxury of emotional chaos in the middle of pressure. They cannot let panic move their hands. So what protects them? Training. repetition, systems, checklists, order. They rely on structure because structure keeps emotion from taking over the room. Military personnel understand this too. When stress spikes, they do not stop and hope to become composed. They fall back on drills. They return to what has been repeated until it becomes automatic. That is why they can function when others freeze. Not because they feel no fear. Because they have practiced action under pressure. Successful leaders do the same. When emotions rise, they do not improvise their entire identity. They return to routines. They ask the same questions. They slow the pace. They control the room by first controlling themselves. That's the key. The calm person is often not the least emotional person. They are the best trained person. It's not about personality, it's about discipline. It's not about natural talent, it's about repetition. It's not about hoping for peace, it's about practicing regulation. That is the truth. So if calm can be trained, how do you train it? You train it the same way you train strength. With repeated reps. Small reps. Ordinary reps. Boring reps. That is where most people fail. They only think about calm when they need it. Too late. If you want access to calm in hard moments, you must build it in easy moments. That is why this phrase matters. Train calm before you need calm. Again. Train calm before you need calm. Let's make it practical. The first tool is breath control. Simple. Direct. Powerful. When your breathing gets shallow, your body prepares for threat. When your breathing gets slower and deeper, your system gets the signal that it does not need to fire at full speed. That means when tension rises, you do not let your breath become accidental. You take control of it. Inhale slowly. Pause. Exhale longer than you inhale. Again. 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 Not because this solves every problem. Because it gives reason a chance to stay online. You have a choice. Breathe like panic owns you. Or breathe like you are still in command. Second, delayed response. You already learned the power of the pause in the last chapter. Now make it a daily habit. Do not answer every message instantly. Do not react to every inconvenience in real time. Practice a measured response in normal situations so you can use it in high-stakes situations. If someone irritates you, wait. If something triggers you, slow down. If you feel the urge to fire back, hold the line. This is training. You are teaching your system that urgency is not authority. Third, written reflection. Most people let thoughts bounce around in the head until they become emotional fog. Do not do that. Write. Get the thought out of the nervous system and onto the page. What happened? What am I feeling? What are the facts? What is the next disciplined action? Writing creates distance. Distance creates clarity. Clarity creates calm. That's the key. A written mind is often a steadier mind. Fourth, physical movement. Emotion lives in the body. Stress builds in the body. Frustration, anxiety, restlessness, anger, overwhelm, they do not just exist in thought. They tighten your chest, your jaw, your shoulders, your stomach. So move. Walk. Lift. Stretch. Breathe while moving. Let the body discharge tension in a controlled way instead of leaking it into your words and decisions. This matters more than people realize. Sometimes you do not need more thinking. You need movement. Fifth, environmental discipline. This one is ignored by emotional people because it sounds too simple. But the environment trains the mind. Noise trains the mind. Clutter trains the mind. Constant notifications train the mind. Chaos outside becomes chaos inside if you let it. So clean the space. Reduce the noise. Put the phone down. Control what enters your eyes and ears first thing in the morning. You don't need their permission. And you do not need the world's chaos in your nervous system before you have anchored yourself. Protect the environment. Protect the inputs. Protect the state. Because calm does not survive easily inside constant disorder. Now listen carefully. None of these tools work because you try them once. They work because you repeat them until they become part of your identity. That is how calm is built. Not in one breakthrough. In daily practice. The calm person is not someone who never feels stress. It is someone who knows what to do when stress arrives. That is a massive difference. And this should change how you see yourself. Stop saying, "I'm just not a calm person." That is lazy language. That is surrender language. That is identity built around avoidance. Replace it. Say, "I am training calm." Say, "I am getting better at regulation." Say, "I am building steadiness." Because your words train your mind, and your habits prove your words. You do not need perfect calm. You need practiced calm. You need accessible calm. You need enough self-command to keep emotion from hijacking your behavior. That is what this book is about. Not becoming emotionless. Becoming reliable under pressure. So remember, calm is built, not born. You do not perform at your hopes. You perform at your habits. Train calm before you need calm. These are not just good ideas. They are operating instructions. Use them, and hard moments stop feeling like identity collapse. They become moments to apply training. They become proof that steadiness is possible. And when that happens, emotional control stops being theory. It becomes visible in your breath, your posture, your words, and your decisions. You trained calm. Good. But calm gets harder when your ego is too involved in every comment, every silence, every look. So now we deal with another major source of emotional instability. Chapter 7. Stop taking everything personally. One of the fastest ways to lose emotional control is this. You make everything about you. Every short reply. Every delayed response. Every critical comment. Every disagreement. Every shift in tone. Every look on someone's face. You pull it all inward. You interpret it all as proof. Proof that you are not respected. Proof that you are not wanted. Proof that you are being judged, dismissed, rejected, attacked. And once you do that, your peace is gone. Because now your emotional state depends on how you interpret every person, every moment, every mood around you. That is a terrible way to live. That's the key. If everything feels personal, everything can control you. So start here. Not everything is about you. Say it again. Not everything is about you. That sentence will save you from wasting years of emotional energy. Because most people are not responding to you nearly as much as you think. They are responding to their stress, their fear, their deadlines, their pain, their distraction, their habits, their unresolved issues, their own internal weather. But when your ego is too involved, you take someone else's internal chaos and turn it into your personal wound. That is how fragile people live. And fragility is expensive. It makes you reactive. It makes you distracted. It makes you easy to destabilize. You have a choice. You can keep assuming that every inconvenience is a commentary on your worth. Or you can grow up emotionally and start reading situations with more discipline. That is strength. That is maturity. That is self-command. Look at a simple example. Your boss is brief with you. Short tone. Few words. No warmth. And immediately, the insecure mind starts building the story. They're upset with me. I did something wrong. They don't respect me. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe they are under pressure. Maybe they are dealing with 10 fires at once. Maybe they slept badly. Maybe they are worried about numbers, clients, deadlines, leadership, reputation, or problems you know nothing about. But if you personalize the moment, you stop observing reality and start worshiping your interpretation. That is dangerous. Because once you decide it is personal, your behavior changes. You get defensive. You over-explain. You shrink. You lose focus. You carry emotional tension into the rest of the day. All because of an assumption. That is weak. Not because you felt something. Because you made yourself the center of a situation without enough evidence. That is why this phrase matters. Interpret less. Observe more. Again. Interpret less. Observe more. Observation says, their tone was brief. Interpretation says, they don't value me. Observation says, the reply came late. Interpretation says, I'm being ignored. Observation says, the client said no. Interpretation says, I'm not good enough. Do you see the difference? One is clean. One is loaded. One keeps you grounded. The other drags you into emotional fiction. Now think about friendship. A friend replies late. Hours go by. Maybe a full day. If you are emotionally undisciplined, you make it personal. They don't care. They always do this to me. I'm clearly not important. But what are the facts? They replied late. That is all. You do not know their mental state. You do not know what they are carrying. You do not know if they are overwhelmed, tired, distracted, sick, overloaded, or simply not glued to their phone. But personalization makes you suffer inside a story you created. And that suffering is optional. That's the key. So much emotional pain comes from interpretation without discipline. Now take business. You make an offer. A client says no. An emotionally weak person hears rejection and turns it into identity. I'm not valuable. I'm terrible at this. Nobody wants what I do. No. A no can mean timing is wrong. Budget is wrong. Priorities are wrong. Fit is wrong. Context is wrong. A no is not always a verdict on your worth. Sometimes it is just a no. And if you keep personalizing every rejection, you will become too fragile to build anything meaningful. Because building anything meaningful requires hearing no without collapsing. It requires being misunderstood without panicking. It requires staying focused when the ego wants to make every obstacle feel humiliating. You don't need their permission. And you do not need everyone's approval to remain steady. That is one of the greatest emotional freedoms a person can develop. Now let's go even further. Sometimes strangers project their pain in public. They are rude, sharp, dismissive, cold, aggressive. And again, if you are not careful, you take it personally. But many times, what people throw at you has more to do with what they are carrying than with who you are. Pain leaks. Stress leaks. Bitterness leaks. Insecurity leaks. Unprocessed frustration leaks. Emotionally immature people spray their inner mess outward. If you absorb it all personally, you become a sponge for other people's dysfunction. That is no way to live. It's not about hypersensitivity, it's about discipline. It's not about mind reading, it's about observation. It's not about ego, it's about emotional stability. That is the shift. And here is the deeper problem with personalization. It makes you fragile because it keeps your ego at the center of everything. If your ego is in every room can hurt you. If your ego is attached to every outcome can shake you. If your ego is involved in every comment can derail you. That makes you emotionally expensive to maintain. Easy to trigger. Easy to distract. Easy to offend. Easy to control. That is not strength. Strength begins when purpose becomes bigger than ego. That is why this phrase matters so much. Protect the mission, not the ego. Again. Protect the mission, not the ego. If your mission is to do great work, then a brief tone should not break your rhythm. If your mission is to build a business, then one rejection should not rewrite your identity. If your mission is to become emotionally strong, then a stranger's projection should not own your nervous system. Protect the mission, not the ego. The ego wants immediate emotional satisfaction. The mission wants long-term direction. The ego wants to be seen as right, respected, special, untouchable. The mission wants progress. Choose carefully. You have a choice. You can keep defending the ego in every small interaction. Or you can conserve your energy for what actually matters. That is emotional intelligence. That is maturity. That is power. So what should the listener do in real life? First, pause the assumption. The moment your mind says, "This is about me," interrupt it. Ask, what else could be true? Not to be naive. To be disciplined. Second, separate observation from interpretation. Write it plainly if needed. The reply was late. The tone was short. The offer was declined. Good. Now stop there. Do not decorate the fact with unnecessary pain. Third, zoom out. Ask, what is this person possibly dealing with that has nothing to do with me? Again, not because they are always innocent. Because you are refusing to let your first interpretation become your emotional master. Fourth, return to purpose. What is the mission here? To do the work. To communicate clearly. To improve. To stay steady. To protect your energy. Return there. The mission gives you direction when the ego wants drama. And fifth, stop needing every moment to validate you. This is big. You will never be emotionally free if you require constant proof that you are appreciated, approved, admired, understood, or prioritized. That hunger will make you weak. It will make you needy. It will make you easy to disturb. You do not need constant emotional reassurance to stay solid. You need standards. You need purpose. You need self-respect. That is enough. So remember, not everything is about you. Interpret less. Observe more. Protect the mission, not the ego. These are not soft ideas. They are armor. Use them, and you stop bleeding energy into assumptions, imagined insults, and ego-based distractions. You become harder to shake, harder to bait, harder to derail. And that is the whole point of this book. Building emotional control so your mind, your mood, and your direction are not held hostage by every passing interaction. You stopped making everything personal. Good. Now it is time to build emotional control where it matters most, at the start of the day, before the world gets access to your mind. Chapter 8. Master the morning, control the mind. If you lose the morning will often take the day with it. That is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle. A rushed start. A distracted mind. A phone in your hand before your feet hit the floor. A flood of notifications before you have formed one clean thought of your own. That is how people begin the day already emotionally compromised. Already pulled outward. Already reacting. Already behind. And then they wonder why they feel scattered, irritated, impulsive, and unfocused by noon. Because chaos loves an unstructured morning. That's the key. Chaos does not need to break down your whole life at once. It only needs access to your first hour. If it gets that, it can shape your mood, your attention, your decisions, and your energy for the rest of the day. That is why emotional control gets easier when the day is won early. Because when you start with structure, you do not spend the rest of the day trying to recover from your own beginning. Burn this phrase into your mind. Win early, think clearly. Say it again. Win early, think clearly. Most people do the opposite. They wake up and immediately surrender their mind to the world. They check the phone. They open messages. They absorb urgency. They consume other people's opinions, emergencies, news, stress, and noise before they have even anchored themselves. That is a terrible trade. Because now your nervous system is not responding to your priorities. It is responding to everybody else's agenda. You have a choice. You can start the day on purpose. Or you can let the day start you. That difference changes everything. Look at the common pattern. The alarm goes off. The hand reaches for the phone. Social media. Text messages. Email. News. Comparison. Pressure. Now the mind is fragmented before the body is even fully awake. You see someone more successful. You see someone more fit. You see someone traveling, building, posting, winning. And before your own day begins, your emotional state is already contaminated by comparison. Then comes the message from work. Now urgency enters. Then the email. Now pressure enters. Then the news. Now fear enters. Then the random scroll. Now distraction enters. And what have you built in the first 20 minutes? Not clarity. Not power. Not direction. Noise. That is why so many people are mentally tired before they have done anything meaningful. They did not begin the day. They absorbed the day. That's the key. What you absorb early will often shape how you act later. This is why the morning matters so much. Not because mornings are magical. Because mornings are influential. They set tone. They create momentum. They establish posture. The way you begin teaches your mind what kind of day this will be. That is why this phrase matters. How you start shapes how you respond. Again. How you start shapes how you respond. If you start rushed, you will respond rushed. If you start distracted, you will respond distracted. If you start reactive, you will respond emotionally. If you start with intention, you will respond with more stability. That is not theory. That is behavioral reality. A person who skips movement in the morning often carries more restlessness into the day. A person who skips silence often carries more noise. A person who skips intention often becomes easy to hijack. A person who skips structure often spends the day trying to gather themselves after every interruption. And that is exhausting. Now compare that to a disciplined morning. Not fancy. Not performative. Disciplined. They wake with intention. They do not rush to the phone. They move the body. They breathe deeply. They take a few minutes to center themselves. They identify the priorities for the day. They do one hard thing before the world gets loud. Now look at the difference. They have already created evidence of self-command. They have already sent one message to the mind: we lead here. That matters. Because emotional stability is easier when you have early proof that you are in charge. That is why structure beats mood. Not once. Repeatedly. You do not need to feel inspired to begin well. You need a system that carries you when inspiration is absent. It's not about motivation, it's about discipline. It's not about mood, it's about structure. It's not about perfection, it's about repetition. That is what strong people understand. They do not build mornings around feelings. They build mornings around standards. And standards protect you before emotion has a chance to take over. Now let's make this practical. What does it mean to master the morning? First, wake with intention. That means you do not let the first minutes be accidental. Before you touch the world, ask yourself one question. How do I want to show up today? Calm, focused, disciplined, patient, sharp, good. Name it. Direct it. Because if you do not define your posture, the world will define it for you. Second, delay the phone. This one matters more than most people want to admit. Your phone is not neutral. It is an emotional delivery system. Comparison, urgency, stimulation, distraction, noise. All of it lives there. So stop letting the loudest device in your life shape the quietest part of your day. You don't need their permission. And you do not need anyone else's update before you have grounded your own mind. Protect the first minutes. Protect them aggressively. Third, move the body. Walk. Stretch. Train. Do something physical. Why? Because movement breaks emotional stagnation. Movement wakes up the system. Movement reduces mental fog. Movement reminds you that you are not trapped inside your thoughts. This is especially important if you wake up heavy, unmotivated, or tense. Do not negotiate with that state. Move. Fourth, breathe deeply. Not casually. Deliberately. Slow breaths. Controlled breaths. Breaths that tell the body it does not need to enter the day in survival mode. Most people wake up and instantly accelerate. You need the opposite. A moment of control before demand begins. That is emotional leadership in one breath. Fifth, set the day's priorities. Not 15 priorities. Not a fantasy list. A clear list. What actually matters today? What must get done? What would make today solid, even if not everything gets finished? Decide early. Because an undefined day invites emotional drift. A defined day creates direction. That's the key. A mind without priorities becomes vulnerable to distractions that feel urgent but change nothing. Sixth, do one hard thing before the world gets loud. This is where momentum becomes real. The hard email. The focused writing block. The workout. The sales call. The difficult conversation preparation. Whatever matters. Do it early. Because once you do one difficult thing on purpose, your emotional posture changes. You stop feeling like the day is happening to you. You start proving that you are happening to the day. That is power. And this leads to the final phrase of the chapter. Routine reduces emotional noise. Again. Routine reduces emotional noise. Why? Because routine removes unnecessary decision-making. Routine protects energy. Routine lowers chaos. Routine creates familiarity in the right places so you can handle unpredictability in the necessary places. People think routine is boring. Good. Boring is useful. Boring keeps you stable. Boring keeps you from reinventing yourself every morning based on how you feel. Boring keeps the standard alive. You have a choice. You can keep waking up emotionally available to everything. Or you can build a morning that anchors your mind before the world makes demands. That does not mean every morning will be perfect. It will not. Some mornings will be messy. Some will be rushed. Some will feel off. That is life. But even then, the principle remains. Return to the routine. Return to the breath. Return to movement. Return to intention. Return to priority. Return to one hard thing. Do not let one bad start become a surrendered day. That is what emotionally weak people do. One off morning becomes an excuse for low standards. Not you. Not anymore. Because now you understand the rule. Win early, think clearly. How you start shapes how you respond. Routine reduces emotional noise. These are not productivity slogans. They are emotional control principles. They protect your focus. They reduce reactivity. They create stability before pressure enters the room. And that is the point. If you master the morning, you stop giving chaos first access to your mind. You stop beginning the day in comparison, urgency, and fragmentation. You begin instead with structure, intention, and command. And that makes emotional control easier for the rest of the day, because you are no longer trying to recover from a weak beginning. You learn to take back your mornings. Good. Now it is time to face something harder. Because emotional control is truly tested when life hurts. When you are rejected, betrayed, embarrassed, or broken, what do you do with that pain? Chapter 9. Use pain as fuel, not an excuse. Pain reveals people. Not the motivational version of them. Not the polished version. The real version. The version that shows up when life hits hard. When the call does not come. When the relationship ends. When the money disappears. When the plan fails. When the betrayal is real. When the embarrassment burns. When the rejection lands in the chest and sits there. That is where character gets exposed. Because pain does one of two things. It either makes you smaller, or it makes you sharper. It either becomes your excuse, or it becomes your fuel. That's the key. Pain can poison you or propel you. Say it again. Pain can poison you or propel you. Most people do not know what to do with pain. So they perform it. They repeat it. They narrate it. They post it. They build an identity around it. They let one wound become the center of their personality. And then they wonder why they stay stuck. Because pain that is not directed becomes pollution. It clouds judgment. It weakens standards. It distorts identity. It makes people emotional, dramatic, resentful, passive, and addicted to sympathy. That is not healing. That is stagnation wearing emotional language. Now be clear. This chapter is not telling you to deny pain. Pain is real. Heartbreak is real. Rejection is real. Failure is real. Humiliation is real. Betrayal is real. Loss is real. You are allowed to feel it. You are allowed to grieve it. You are allowed to be affected by it. But you are not allowed to let it become your permanent excuse. You have a choice. You can let pain become a story you live inside. Or you can turn pain into a force that rebuilds you. That is emotional control at a higher level. Not the absence of pain. The direction of pain. Look at rejection. Someone gets rejected for a role, a promotion, an opportunity, a relationship, a proposal, a dream. That sting is real. But what happens next? That is where the future gets decided. One person says, "This proves I'm not enough." They withdraw. They complain. They grow bitter. They keep replaying the moment until it becomes identity. Another person says, "Good. Now I know where I need to get stronger." They sharpen their skill. They improve the pitch. They learn the gap. They stop romanticizing potential and start respecting preparation. Same pain, different direction. That's why this phrase matters. Do not waste the wound. Again, do not waste the wound. If rejection showed you a weakness, fix it. If failure exposed a blind spot, study it. If embarrassment revealed immaturity, outgrow it. If heartbreak revealed dependency, rebuild yourself. If betrayal revealed poor boundaries, strengthen them. Pain becomes useful when it becomes instruction. Otherwise, it becomes theater. Now look at the entrepreneur who loses money. That loss hurts. Especially if pride was attached to the move. Especially if people were watching. Especially if they thought this one decision would finally prove something. The emotionally weak person turns the loss into shame. I'm not built for this. I always ruin things. I'm finished. Then fear takes over. They stop moving wisely. They become reckless or frozen. But the disciplined person does something different. They feel the loss. Then they study it. Where did emotion override judgment? Where did impatience override restraint? Where did ego override strategy? That is where growth begins. Not in pretending it did not hurt. In refusing to let the hurt go to waste. Because money lost can become wisdom earned if the lesson is extracted. That's the key. Pain without reflection becomes repeated pain. Pain with reflection becomes transformation. Look at the athlete who gets cut from the team. That moment can crush the ego. All the training, all the hope, all the expectation, gone. One version of that athlete collapses, makes excuses, blames favoritism, blames politics, blames timing. Maybe some of that is even true, but none of that builds power. The stronger version asks a better question. What now? Not, why me? What now? That question changes everything. What skill was missing? What standard was not high enough? What level of conditioning was absent? What discipline now becomes non-negotiable? Then they train harder, smarter, longer, cleaner, not from blind rage, from directed pain. That is different. That is mature. That is useful suffering. Because suffering only becomes valuable when it is pointed somewhere. And that leads us to heartbreak. This one ruins people because they attach identity to the loss. A person gets left, or betrayed, or abandoned, or disappointed by someone they built their emotional world around. And now they do something dangerous. They beg for the old life back. They chase closure from the person who caused the fracture. They keep trying to re-enter a space that already told them no. That is self-abandonment. You don't need their permission. And you do not need the person who hurt you to approve your healing. That is one of the hardest truths in this chapter. Sometimes pain is not asking you to recover what was lost. Sometimes pain is asking you to rebuild who you became while you were losing yourself. That is a different mission. A higher mission. Heartbreak can become the doorway to discipline. The discipline to stop chasing what dishonors you. The discipline to rebuild your body. The discipline to reclaim your time. The discipline to strengthen your standards. The discipline to remember who you are without needing someone else to validate it. That is how pain becomes power. Not through revenge. Through reconstruction. That's why this phrase matters so much. Turn the hit into horsepower. Again. Turn the hit into horsepower. Take the hit. Then lift with it. Build with it. Write with it. Train with it. Learn with it. Focus with it. Do not sit there polishing the wound like it is your greatest possession. Do something with it. It's not about suffering, it's about direction. It's not about what happened, it's about what you do next. It's not about being untouched, it's about being rebuilt. That is the message. Now let's make this practical. What should the listener do when pain hits? First, tell the truth. Name it cleanly. This hurt. This broke my confidence. This embarrassed me. This exposed me. Good. No denial. No fake toughness. Just truth. Second, refuse performance. Stop announcing the pain to people who cannot help you transform it. Stop rehearsing it for emotional effect. Stop using the wound to collect sympathy while avoiding responsibility. Feel it privately if needed. Process it honestly. But do not build a stage around it. Third, extract the lesson. Ask direct questions. What did this teach me about my standards? What did this teach me about my blind spots? What did this teach me about my habits, boundaries, discipline, preparation, or emotional dependency? The lesson is the value. If you miss the lesson, you keep the pain and lose the growth. Fourth, convert emotion into output. This is critical. Do not just think about the pain. Move with it. Train. Work. Write. Study. Build. Organize. Improve. Repair what can be repaired. Strengthen what can be strengthened. Energy must move. Pain left sitting too long becomes poison. Pain put into disciplined action becomes momentum. Fifth, stop using pain as permission to lower standards. This is where many people lose. They say, "I've been through a lot," and use that sentence to justify inconsistency, bitterness, lateness, self-neglect, bad decisions, emotional chaos, or lack of discipline. No. Pain explains behavior. It does not excuse weak standards forever. You have a choice. You can use pain as a reason to abandon yourself. Or you can use pain as a reason to become someone stronger, cleaner, wiser, and harder to break. That is the choice. That is the whole battle. And make no mistake, this is not easy. Some pain stays for a while. Some wounds ache even while you are growing. Fine. Carry it. But direct it. Because suffering does not become noble just because it is deep. It becomes useful when it creates discipline. Useful when it creates clarity. Useful when it creates output. Useful when it creates a stronger identity. So remember, pain can poison you or propel you. Do not waste the wound. Turn the hit into horsepower. These are not just motivational lines. They are a code. Live by them, and pain stops being just a place where you bleed. It becomes a place where you build. It becomes a furnace that burns away illusion, weakness, dependency, and excuses. And that is what emotional control ultimately means. Not that life stops hurting, but that even pain gets put to work in service of your growth. You learned how to use pain. Good. Now it is time to finish this book where all true control ends, identity. Because the final step is not managing one emotion or one hard moment. The final step is becoming the kind of person who cannot be easily derailed. Chapter 10. Become the person who cannot be derailed. This book was never just about calming down. It was never just about breathing better. It was never just about surviving bad days. It was about identity. It was about becoming someone different. Someone steadier. Someone harder to shake. Someone who does not hand over their power every time life gets loud. That is the final standard. Not temporary control. Permanent self-command. Because emotional control is not a trick for emergencies. It is a way of being. A way of carrying yourself. A way of deciding. A way of responding. A way of living. That's the key. You are not here to learn a few techniques and go back to the same unstable habits. You are here to become the kind of person who cannot be easily derailed. The kind of person obstacles do not confuse. The kind of person pressure does not own. The kind of person moods do not govern. That is real power. And here is the sentence that defines this final chapter. Your power is your stability. Say it again. Your power is your stability. Not your intensity. Not your drama. Not your talent alone. Not your charm. Not your speed. Your stability. Because in a distracted world, stable people win. In a reactive world, stable people lead. In a chaotic world, stable people become rare. And rare qualities become powerful qualities. Think about the leader in a difficult room. People are emotional. Voices rise. Pressure builds. Blame starts moving around the table. Everyone wants a quick emotional discharge. Everyone wants to protect ego, position, image, comfort. And then one person stays measured. Not passive. Measured. They do not rush to speak. They do not panic. They do not collapse into defensiveness. They do not make the room heavier. They steady it. That person has power. Why? Because when others lose control, stability becomes authority. That is not just leadership skill. That is emotional mastery. Now think about a parent in chaos. The child is upset. The house is loud. Schedules are colliding. Fatigue is real. Pressure is high. The unstable parent multiplies the chaos. They react emotionally to emotion. They escalate what needed grounding. But the grounded parent does something else. They regulate themselves first. They hold tone. They hold posture. They hold the moment without letting it drag them under. That changes everything. Because stability does not just protect you. It protects the people around you. That is why emotional control is not selfish. It is service. It is leadership. It is responsibility in visible form. Now think about the creator, the writer, the builder, the entrepreneur, the artist, the disciplined professional, the one producing work in a world obsessed with instant feedback. What separates the weak from the dangerous? One thing: consistency. The weak person needs applause to keep going. The dangerous person keeps going with or without applause. The weak person needs a mood. The dangerous person needs a standard. The weak person stops when emotion dips. The dangerous person keeps moving while emotion catches up. That's why this phrase matters. Consistency is emotional strength made visible. Again, consistency is emotional strength made visible. Everybody says they want results. Few people want the emotional discipline that results require. Because results are not built on one great day. They are built on repeated steadiness, repeated self-command, repeated return, repeated action under imperfect emotional conditions. That is the true competitive advantage. Not genius, not luck, not constant motivation. Emotional steadiness. The ability to remain directed when others get distracted. The ability to remain calm when others get reactive. The ability to remain committed when others get bored, discouraged, offended, or tired. You have a choice. You can keep being a person who is impressive only when conditions feel good. Or you can become a person who remains effective under pressure. That is a different identity. A higher identity. An identity built on standards, not emotions. This is where many people misunderstand strength. They think being unshakable means feeling nothing. Wrong. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become unshakable in direction. There is a difference. You can feel sadness and still act. You can feel anger and still choose restraint. You can feel disappointment and still honor the plan. You can feel fear and still move forward. You can feel deeply without abandoning the mission. That is maturity. That is strength. That is control. You don't need their permission. And you do not need your emotions to fully approve before you continue. That lesson should be burned into your identity now. Because if you keep waiting for emotional perfection, you will never become powerful. Power belongs to the person who can carry emotion without surrendering direction. That's the key. And that means your new identity must be built deliberately. So what does the person who cannot be derailed actually do? They keep promises to themselves. That matters. Because self-trust is a form of emotional armor. When you know you follow through, moods lose some of their influence. They return to the standard. Again and again. They do not reinvent the rules every time they feel tired. They do not negotiate with every dip in motivation. They return. They protect their inputs. Because what enters the mind affects what exits the mouth and the body. They protect sleep, space, routine, attention, and environment. They do not act like stability is accidental. They build it. They recover fast. This matters too. Being undrailable does not mean never getting hit. It means not staying down mentally longer than necessary. You get disappointed. You reset. You get emotional. You recenter. You make a mistake. You correct it. You feel the hit. Then you move. That is resilience in motion. It's not about perfection, it's about recovery. It's not about never feeling, it's about never surrendering. It's not about being cold, it's about being committed. That is the identity shift. And make no mistake, this identity makes you hard to break. Not because life becomes gentle, because you stop becoming fragile. You stop requiring perfect conditions. You stop making every feeling sacred. You stop building your life around emotional weather. Instead, you become anchored. You become measured. You become reliable. And reliability is power. Especially now. Especially in a world built to distract you, provoke you, rush you, outrage you, compare you, and fracture your attention. In that kind of world, a stable person is not ordinary. A stable person is a threat to mediocrity. A stable person is hard to manipulate, hard to bait, hard to derail. That is who you are building. So build consciously. When the attack comes, stay measured. When the chaos rises, stay grounded. When the praise disappears, keep producing. When the setbacks hit, keep walking. When the mood drops, keep honoring the standard. When the world gets louder, become clearer. That is the final level. And it leads to the last phrase of the book's teaching. Feel everything. Obey nothing except your highest standard. Again. Feel everything. Obey nothing except your highest standard. Feel the disappointment. Feel the grief. Feel the frustration. Feel the pressure. Feel the fatigue. Feel the uncertainty. Fine. Feel all of it. But do not bow. Do not hand the wheel to what is temporary. Do not let passing emotions overrule permanent values. Your highest standard must become more real to you than your strongest mood. That is emotional mastery. That is self-respect. That is freedom. Because once you reach that point, life can still hit you, but it cannot easily steer you. And that is the real win. Not a life without challenge. A self that remains directed inside challenge. So remember, your power is your stability. Consistency is emotional strength made visible. Feel everything. Obey nothing except your highest standard. Those are not just closing lines. They are your operating code now. Live by them, and this book stops being something you heard. It becomes someone you are. Stable, disciplined, focused, difficult to break, dangerous to drift, unshakable in direction. You learned how to control your emotions before they control you. Now there is only one thing left to do. Stand up, take these principles out of theory and into your day, and prove, through action, not intention, that your life will no longer be governed by moods, impulses, excuses, or emotional chaos. You have heard the truth now, and the truth is simple. Emotions are real, but they are not in charge unless you hand them the keys. Every chapter came back to the same law. Your life changes the moment your feelings stop making your decisions. When you pause instead of react, you win. When you move despite discomfort, you grow. When you stop feeding destructive stories, you get your clarity back. When you build standards, routines, and discipline, you stop living as a passenger and start living as a force. So from this point forward, no more saying, "This is just how I am." No more blaming mood, stress, fear, anger, or doubt for a weak day, a weak choice, or a weak pattern. You know better now. And because you know better, you must move better. Here is your challenge. For the next 7 days, do not obey a single emotion that tries to pull you away from your standards. Notice it. Name it. Master it. Then act anyway. That is how control is built. That is how power is earned. That is how your life changes.